All right, let's go to Genesis 15. All right, we'll go ahead and pray and get started this morning. Father, thank you for your goodness to us. Lord, I pray that you'd help us as we focus in on your word. Help us to be attentive. And Lord, I pray that you'd help us be faithful and diligent students of your word. Help us understand these things. Help us to see, even from the examples of the people here, lessons for our own life. Pray that you'd bless now in Jesus' name. Amen. So, last week we talked about a fellow by the name of Melchizedek. He's the king of Salem, priest of Salem. He's both a king and a priest. And the Psalms tell us that Jesus, when he came the first time and the second time, he's going to have a priesthood after the order of Melchizedek. And the point that's being made there is not that he is going to be Melchizedek or that Melchizedek was Jesus, but that Melchizedek is a perfect type of the priesthood that Jesus is going to hold. Because one, in Genesis, there's no record of lineage. There's no descent that's recorded. There's no beginning of days. There's no end of life that's recorded for Melchizedek. He's there on the scene, and he is already a king priest. Now, for the Levitical priests that the Jews had, the Levitical Aaronic priesthood, they had to have a specific lineage. They had to be not only from the tribe of Levi, but they also had to be from the family of Aaron, and there had to be a genealogical verification that they're from those tribes and that family. Otherwise, they could not be a priest. And a problem with the Aaronic priesthood is that with pure mortals holding that office, it is an office that has to continually be repopulated because eventually you're going to die. And actually for them, at the age of 50, they went into retirement, and they can no longer serve as priests after the age of 50. So from 30 to 50, they get 20 years, and that's all that they get to serve, and then after that, they're done. And so it had to constantly have new people coming in. Well, Jesus is going to be the only one who is going to have his priesthood and kingship. And so with the Jews, priests could not be kings, kings could not be priests. They were two different tribes that fulfilled those roles. But with Jesus, he's going to have a new priesthood, the order after the order of Melchizedek. So he lives forever. There's not going to be any end to his priesthood. And now, because of this priesthood, he ever lives, Paul says, to make intercession for us. And that's why we know that we are eternally saved. One of the reasons, because Jesus prays for us that our faith does not fail. Now, in chapter 15 of Genesis, we looked at the fact that the Abrahamic covenant is officially being ratified and confirmed. There is actual strong covenant language being made here where God says specifically that he's going to make a covenant. Actually, in the Hebrew it says he's going to cut a covenant. And what this is where they take 3 or 4 animals, cut them in half, spread them apart, spread the halves apart from each other, and they walk in between these animals. But God is the only one that walked between these. God confirmed the covenant. He made the covenant essentially with himself that he is going to uphold this covenant. All the terms and conditions are going to be met by God. Now, at the end of chapter 15 here, in verse 16, right near the end, the prophecy is made about the fact that Abraham's descendants are going to go into Egyptian bondage. Although it doesn't say Egypt there, we know from the fulfillment at the end of the chapter, at the end of the book, that this is what it's talking about. And after the 4th generation, or after 400 years, he's going to bring them out and bring them into the promised land. And he's waiting, it says here in verse 16, but in the 4th generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. And so the Amorites, that's one of the tribes of Canaan. And they are a wicked people. We'll talk more about them when we get into Leviticus and such a little bit later. But they're described, their sin, and God is waiting until they have reached the full measure, till their sin is filled up, and then God's going to use the nation of Israel to judge them. Now, Wayne brought up a question last week, and I didn't know the answer right off, and I thought of the answer later. He asked, why didn't God just eliminate them? You know, like with the flood, God destroyed the entire world pretty much immediately with the flood, all at one time. Why did God wait and not drive them all out at one time? And the answer is actually in Exodus. Let's look over there. Keep your place here. We're going to come right back. Let's look over to Exodus. So this rabbit trail is Wayne's fault. Exodus 23. And in this particular portion of Scripture, the Lord is giving them regulations for what they're to do when they go into the land, and their relationship, what their relationship to the people is supposed to be. And in verse number 27, Exodus 23, verse 27, he says, I will send my fear before thee, and will destroy all the people to whom thou shalt come, and I will make all thine enemies turn their backs unto thee. And I will send hornets before thee, which shall drive out the Hivite and the Canaanite and the Hittite from before thee. Now watch what he says, verse 29. I will not drive them out from before thee in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the beasts of the field multiply against thee. By little and little I will drive them out from before thee, until thou be increased and inherit the land. So, had God just wiped them all out, then the land that they have been working for all those years, part of the reason the land was a land flowing with milk and honey is because it had people there working the land. It was a fruitful land. It had been worked. It had been fertilized and everything like that, and so it was good land. But if you just let that sit for years on end and not work it, then you're going to be starting all over again. And God didn't want that for the children of Israel, so they come in, this land is already being worked, and so God drives them out little by little as the nation of Israel increases. That way the land stays good for them. And so, you know, like lions and bears, lions and tigers and bears, oh my. Sorry, I couldn't resist. But the lions and the bears that would be in the land, the various other wild animals that would be there that have already been driven out by the people over the centuries, they would begin to populate and take back over that land, and now you have this nuisance that you have to try to get rid of as well, and this danger. And so God says, I'm not going to drive them all out at once. I'm going to take my time, drive them out little by little. That way you guys can increase, and that way the land stays plentiful and fruitful for you, and so it'll be a little bit safer as far as the animals are concerned. But essentially what God is showing here to Abraham back in Genesis chapter 15 is that his descendants are going to be his army. They are going to be his arm of judgment, so to speak, to go in and judge these wicked people. And that's what we have to keep in mind when we think of the command to go into the land. Kill everybody. Wipe everybody out. When you come in contact with these people, don't make any covenants with them. Don't put them to tribute. Don't make any leagues with them. Now, of course, they break all of those rules God sets down for them. But why did God tell them to do that? It's because God was using them as an instrument of judgment against these people. And at the same time, the reason God did it slowly as opposed to doing it all at once, which he very well could have done. I mean, it wouldn't have been hard for God to just send fire down from heaven like he's going to do with Sodom and Gomorrah, or to send lightning down like he does with the armies that come against Elijah and try demanding things from him, and lightning comes down and strikes him. You know, God could have turned the animals against them and brought the bears into the land to just ravage the people and destroy them. But he didn't do that. Because even though Israel is going to be God's arm of judgment, he's going to do it gradually so they can inherit a fruitful land and not a land that they're going to have to start all over trying to work it. All right, so we're going to be in chapter 16, and God told Abraham, Abraham, I understand you're 80 years old, but you're going to start a family, and you're going to have lots of kids. In fact, your descendants are going to be like the stars of the sky and like the sand on the seashore. Yippee. Well, Abraham believed God. But was Abraham's faith perfect? No, not at all. Because Abraham understands, Sarah's kind of past this point. She's past the point of no return here. And there's just, this isn't going to work. And so Abraham has I guess you could say, a lapse in faith. Maybe a misunderstanding. Well, the Lord says, I'm going to have a child. So Sarah can't do it. I guess we got to help God out. And Sarah kind of helps out with this. Notice here, chapter 16. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had an handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said unto Abram, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abraham hearkened to the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband, Abram, to be his wife. And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. And Sarai said unto Abram, My wrong be upon thee. Abraham, this is your fault. As far as I remember, this was your idea. Behold, my wrong be upon thee. I have given my maid into thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. And the Lord judged between me and thee. But Abram said unto Sarai, Behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarai dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. Now, it doesn't go into detail what Sarai did to Hagar. And you could only imagine. Says she dealt hardly with her. It was enough to make her fearful for her life, so she ran away. The angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence comest thou? And whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Return to thy mistress, and submit thyself unto her hands. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. And she called the name of the Lord that spake unto her, Thou God seest me. For she said, Have I also here looked upon him that seeth me? Wherefore the well was called Bir Lahai. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bare Abram a son, and Abram called his name, which Hagar bare, Ishmael. And Abram was 86 years old. So he's 86 years old at this time when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abraham. So is this a good idea? No, this was a terrible idea. And this was a lapse of faith on both of their parts. God says, I'm going to give you a son. Abraham says, well, we're too old. Sarai says, I'm way too old. Nothing's working anymore. So here's the solution. This must be what God means. We got to help God out. Well, we never do that, do we? We never say, I know this is what God says, but He says He'll do this, but we just kind of need to help God out a little bit, make sure it gets done. Otherwise, and if it wasn't for us, it's when we read these accounts in the Bible, we got to be careful, because a temptation that we have is to try to model these characters in the Bible. That we're looking for things like, well, we need to be like Abraham, or we need to be like so-and-so. No, you don't need to be like Abraham. We don't need to be like David. We're not David. We're not Abraham. The point here is that God used this man because of his faith, weak as it was. And when you look later in the Bible, you get to Hebrews chapter 11, you have this great hall of faith. And people want to look at that and say, man, look at these great people. They were not very good people. And here's Abraham. He's committing adultery, essentially, with his wife's permission. He has a lapse in faith, but yet he made it there. Why? Because though his faith was weak, he still had faith and trusted God. And that should be an encouragement to all of us. I don't know about you, but my faith is not always what it should be. And we can certainly lack. But God is faithful. He is the one who is faithful. And He always comes through and does what is right. Now notice here, as a result of this, we have another nation. So remember, God promises Abraham, you're going to have a seed from him. I'm going to make great nations. Kings shall come from you. Well, this is exactly the same promise that comes to Ishmael. You ever wonder why they're so confused over whose land it is? It's this right here. Notice it says, verse 12, he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall what? Dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Isn't that really interesting? Now, he's not giving them the land, but he says they're going to dwell in the land. That is why this fight is going on today, because of what takes place here in Genesis chapter 16. We could look at our lapse of faith and think, well, it's just... Now, what Abraham did was terrible, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't seem like it's that bad to lead to World War III. This one little decision here is what's going to put this world in World War III. And really, the Second World War revolved around the Jewish people. This was a really big deal that was made right here. But so, 86 years old, Abraham has a son, starts his family. Most people, long before this, are ready to be done and even be done with the grandkids probably by that point. But notice here in chapter 17. Chapter 17, we find that though Ishmael is born to Abraham, he is not going to be the heir. He does not receive the promise. Notice here, chapter 17, verse number 4. As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham. Now, what's interesting is in the Hebrew, the only difference between Abram and Abraham is a rough breathing mark. And some Bible scholars say that the reason that's there is because that's reference to the Holy Spirit, the breathing out of God. So, receiving the Holy Spirit took him from Abram to Abraham. For a father of many nations have I made thee. Verse 6, I will make thee exceeding fruitful, I will make nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee, and I will establish my covenant between me and thee, and thy seed after thee in their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee, and to be thy seed after thee. And I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. And God said unto Abraham, Thou shalt keep my covenant, therefore, thou and thy seed after thee in their generations. This is my covenant, which ye shall keep between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised. Okay, so that's going to be the sign of the covenant. Now, jump over to verse number 15. And God said unto Abraham, As for Sarai thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall her name be. And I will bless her, and give thee a son also of her. Yea, I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her. Then Abraham fell upon his face and laughed, and said in his heart, Shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah that is 90 years old bear? And Abram said unto God, Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee. Now remember, the first time God made this promise to Abraham, he said, Oh, that Eleazar, the steward that is born in my house, that he could live before you, that he could be the heir. And that would be rational. Now, I'm 100 years old. And I've already got Ishmael. Why can't you just let him be the child, be the heir? That's not what God's plan is. Verse 19. And God said, Sarah, thy wife, shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at the set time in the next year. And he left off talking with him, and God went up from Abraham. So God blessed Ishmael. God's going to make a nation of him. He's going to make many people come from Ishmael. But the covenant is going to be with the child that Sarah bears. Now, I want you to notice over here this issue of polygamy. This comes up sometimes. Most people reading Genesis for the first time, when they come upon this, they're like, whoa, wait a minute here. Is God permitting polygamy? Does God allow a man to have multiple wives? I'm going to shock you here. The answer is yes. But not in the way that you might think. Let me ask you this. Does God allow people to rape? Yeah. Does it happen? Could God stop that? Does he stop it all the time? So he allows it. So does God allow a man to have multiple wives? In that sense, yes. But here's what we need to remember. Just because God allows something doesn't mean he's okay with it. It doesn't mean that he approves of that practice happening. One of the things we need to understand is Abraham is coming from a culture that already accepted that. Now, it's not to say that we don't try to change our culture. But here's one of the things that we see as God unveils his plan of redemption over the course of history. He doesn't just call Abraham out and establish the kingdom of God on earth with Abraham. It's a slow, gradual process over 3,000 years in which God unfolds this plan. And he doesn't reveal it all at one time. He reveals a little bit by little bit by little bit, and each time he gives a little bit more information. It's not until we get past the Exodus that God makes abundantly clear, one man, one woman for life. Now we have the pattern. The pattern is given to us in Genesis at the very beginning. When God made man, he made one woman. That was to be the pattern. And coming out of this culture now, that's a fallen humanity where they've already allowed polygamous marriages to take place, Abraham comes out of that, and he doesn't necessarily know better. He doesn't exactly have the revelation of Genesis. That doesn't come about until some 400 years later. And so God takes time to reveal that. So it's not that it's part of God's plan. It's not that God approves of it. It's not that God is okay with it. He's not okay with it. But he didn't try to correct everything immediately. Because that takes revelation. That takes the grace of God. Could you imagine Abraham going through just telling every single person and executing everybody that has polygamous marriages? It's not going to get very far. It takes time for God to reveal that. You know, the same thing happens today. You get some missionary that goes to a third world country where they still practice polygamous marriages. You don't just go in there and say, well, you're going to get saved, you have to get rid of every single one of those wives. You got to figure out which one you want to keep and get rid of the rest. I actually heard one missionary, he went in to an area and the one man actually started killing off his other wives. Like, no, don't do that. That's not okay either. And so you got to work through those things. It takes time. And that's exactly what God's doing. God is very gracious. God is very patient. He takes time. Now, it is interesting to note that Isaac comes from Abraham's first wife, Sarah. And this we see a pattern that follows with every heir in Abraham's lineage. In the line that leads to Christ, they are always born to the first wife. This is God's attestation to the fact that only the first wife is the one approved by God. I think that's interesting. Now let's do this. Let's back up here real quick to Genesis chapter 13. We briefly commented on this because we're going to come back to it at this point to get the context here for what's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. Try to deal with this together. But Genesis 13, Abraham and Lot have been traveling together up to this point, and God has been blessing both of them, and their flocks have become too large to be in the same area together. Their servants are beginning to fight with one another. There's plenteous. And so it's time for them to part ways. Chapter 13, verse 1. Says, and Abraham went up out of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the south. And Abraham was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. And he went on his journey from the south, even unto Bethel, unto the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Hai, unto the place of the altar which he had made there at the first. And Abraham called on the name of the Lord. And Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents, and the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled then in the land. And Abram said unto Lot, let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. If thou wilt depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves one from the other. And Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan. Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent toward Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward, for all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed after thee. So here we have their parting of ways. So Lot sees the area around Sodom and Gomorrah, sees that it's lush and plentiful, and this would be a good place to raise herds and to feed them. And so he goes there. Now, is Sodom a good place or a bad place? It's a good place as far as the land goes. But what about their morality? Is this a place where you want to raise a family? No, not exactly. Now, why was Sodom so bad? Well, we know one of the sins that was taking place in Sodom and Gomorrah, same thing that plagues our world today, sodomy, homosexuality. That was going on there. But I want you to keep your place here. Go with me to Ezekiel chapter 16, because there was more to it than that. Ezekiel chapter 16. Now in Ezekiel chapter 16, the Lord is referring to Israel when he says this. But the reason he refers to Israel this way is because they are acting just like Sodom and Gomorrah. He actually refers to them this way. This is why when you get to the book of Revelation, it speaks of Jerusalem, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt. This is why. It's because they're acting just like them. Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49. Behold, this was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom. Pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. And they were haughty and committed abomination before me. Now, it's easy to understand what he means when he says, and they committed abomination before me. That's what we typically think of when we think of Sodom and Gomorrah and what's going on. But notice these things that he mentions before that. Pride, fullness of bread, abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters. She didn't strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. Was haughty. This is what Sodom and Gomorrah was like. It wasn't just that there was homosexuality going on, which there was, and it was rampant, and it was of the worst kind, worse than what we even see in America. But they lived in complete luxury and idleness. So when Lot looks down and he sees land, he sees, man, this is really good land. And the people are really profiting off it. There is abundance of food down there. And the land is so good you don't even have to work. We just sit around idle all day. And so he moves there. Now what does he do when he gets there? Notice verse 12, it says, back in Genesis chapter 13, it says, Lot, here in your notes, Lot pitched his tent toward Sodom. Well, that doesn't seem like such a big deal. You know, you come home from a day's working, you want dinner and a show, so you just pitch the tent towards Sodom so you can see. Look how crazy these people are. Well, you know, after a while, that kind of gets to you. It desensitizes you. And actually, we'll see that in just a moment. And then we come to chapter 14. Chapter 14, notice down to verse 11. Remember, these kings come against Sodom and Gomorrah. They took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals and went their way, and they took Lot, Abraham's brother's son, with his goods. So that means if they're coming and they take the stuff out of Sodom and Gomorrah and Lot goes with them, where then was Lot? He's in. Lot is now in the city of Sodom. So it wasn't enough for him to just be in the plain and then pitch his tent towards Sodom. Eventually he moved his tent into Sodom. Well, why is that? It's because he's becoming more and more comfortable with the lifestyle of the people there. Now let's go to chapter 19. Chapter 19. Chapter 19, and then we'll do this next blank and we'll be done and we'll finish up next week, I guess. Chapter 19 here, verse 1. And there came two angels to Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. And Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. Now, actually, let's just read just a little bit more here. And he said, Behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet, and ye shall rise up early, and go on your ways. And they said, Nay, but we will abide in the street all night. And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him, and entered into his house, and he made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot, and said unto him, Where are the men which came into thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. And Lot went out at the door unto them, and shut the door after him, and said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. Behold, now I have 2 daughters. I can't even fathom how messed up your mind would have to be to do something like this. I have 2 daughters which have not known a man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing. For therefore, now watch this. For therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. So here comes these 2 strangers to Sodom. Lot's in the gate. Now notice here it says in your notes, Lot is in the gate of Sodom. That means that he's a leader in the city. This is where the elders of the city would meet, and they would hear different cases and stuff like that, and they would judge between people and make decisions. So now notice what's going on. Lot is here in the gate of the city, and he sees these 2 strangers come up. I don't think he knows at that point that they're angels. But he knows the type of people that are in Sodom. And he sees these 2 strangers coming, and he knows exactly what is going to happen to them if they stay. Because in verse 8, he says, the reason I brought them into my house is so you won't do this to them. Meaning that apparently there was a custom in Sodom that when newcomers came, the men of the city were going to show who was in charge. And it's kind of like a new guy comes into prison, and there's going to be a group there that's going to show them who's the boss. This is exactly what's going on here. That was their plan. Lot knew this. Lot's seen it plenty of times before, and here come these 2 men. Like, no, you guys need to come in to my house. You're not going to stay in the streets, and then tomorrow you need to get out of town. What a wicked, vile place this was. How in the world did Lot get there? Well, it started with a small compromise. He was so focused on the benefits of the land that he didn't take into consideration the impact it's going to have on him and his family. And what we'll see next week then is how tragically his family ended. And it could have easily been prevented had he just gone a different way. You're dismissed.